Howdy folks, Spencer here, and today I'll be going over the best space and ground reputation traits to use in Star Trek Online as of January 2025. As always, chapters to each topic are listed down below. Today's video is brought to you all by the STO Discord, a community-driven server for like-minded gamers to come together and share in their passion for all things Star Trek Online. Whether you're looking for a place to learn more about the game or an active community running events on PlayStation, they've got you covered. And for the PlayStation folks here, they run monthly giveaways including a $10 PSN gift card. The STO Discord is all about bringing players together, so if that's what you're looking for, head on over to discord.gg/stocoms or hit the link in the pinned comment down below. Thanks again to the STO Discord for sponsoring today's video. And for the video order today, I'll be going through the space reputation and active space rep traits first, followed by the ground in the same order. And a quick note, for the values any of these traits provide, if you're just starting out, you're going to see a slightly lower value than what you see on screen because you have the rank 1 version. The rank 2 versions of these traits that you are going to see throughout the video are obtained by hitting tier 6 in the reputation those traits come from. In addition, as with my prior trait recommendations, these are picks best suited for the general player base, which overwhelmingly uses directed energy weapon builds, such as beams or cannons. If you're doing something a bit more niche like exotics, supporting your PvP, please do some additional research on the builds Discord to make sure you're getting the best recommendations for your specific playstyle. And with that out of the way, let's jump into the space reputation traits. The very first space reputation trait is Advanced Targeting Systems, and this comes from Tier 2 of the Dyson reputation. At rank 2, this provides 20% critical severity, which makes this a great pick for any build focused on doing more damage. And for the second and third space reputation traits, we have two great options to get some critical chance to better take advantage of that extra critical severity from the first trait. The first of these is Precision from Tier 2 of the new Romulus reputation. When slotted, the rank 2 version of this is going to provide 5% critical hit chance. And the second is Tyler's Duality, and this comes from Tier 4 of the Discovery Legends reputation. This provides a scaling critical chance buff that scales based on your maximum hull capacity, with the rank 2 version of this providing up to 7.5% critical chance when you're at 200,000 hull capacity. Okay, and with Tyler's, the value you had just seen was a little bit lower because I've been recording all this from ground so far, and when you're looking at anything that scales in space on ground, the numbers are always off. But for Tyler's here with my Mirror Strikewing Escort, I'm seeing 4.4% crit chance, and this is with me having right around 100,000 hull capacity. And if you want to squeeze a bit more out of this, you can make sure in your skill tree that you have the 3 points of hull capacity selected. And there's also a device that we often use on the higher performing builds called the Prototype Ablative Jevonite Hardpoints. You can pick these up off the exchange. You can sometimes pick up some duty officer missions where you can basically craft them. You exchange Jevonite to get a couple of these in return. And what these do is they provide 100 starship hull capacity for 15 minutes. So these get a lot of use on higher level builds. They're a bit expensive on the exchange. The drop rate to get them from DOF packs is not great. Do not spend more than a couple 100,000 EC on one of these things. They're not worth it. But if you can pick them up cheap, they're quite handy. You just saw that I gained 16k hull capacity on this escort by turning that on. And what that means is I'm getting another 0.5% of critical chance from Tyler's Duality there. In addition, I've got better survivability for the next 15 minutes because I've got the extra hull capacity. Now, for the 3 traits I've mentioned so far, those are a staple on most endgame builds, but for these last 2 slots, you do have some options. For boosting your damage output, any of the traits I'm about to mention will work perfectly fine. Magnified Firepower from Tier 4 of the Gamma Task Force reputation. This is pretty straightforward, 6.3% bonus weapon damage with the rank 2 variant. And then if I scroll up on the list here, we have Controlled Countermeasures. This is from Tier 4 of the Temporal Defense reputation, and this will provide you a 9.4% Cat 2 bonus energy weapon and projectile damage buff against controlled targets, so enemies that are impacted by abilities like Gravity Well, Tractor Beam, and so on. And then from Tier 4 of the new car reputation, we have the Auxiliary Power Configuration Offense variant. This provides a scaling Cat 2 bonus all damage buff and accuracy buff based on your auxiliary power level. Now, of the 3, this is the only one that's actually going to go out and buff up the non-weapon sources on your build. So if you're on, let's say, a complex plasma fire setup and you have high aux power for fleet power, this is what you may want to consider instead of the other 2. Now, to show you how this will scale up, let me make it so you can actually see the numbers here. So I'm at 75 auxiliary power right now, and that's a 4.7% Cat 2 damage buff. If I pop an Aux Bat, that takes me to 130, and that's 8.1. And if I pop OSS alongside that, it goes up to almost 10% there for a very brief duration. So if you're using a build where you have very high aux power, then having the auxiliary power configuration offense can be very beneficial. But if you're not going in and buffing up your aux power, then those other two traits would be worth looking at instead. Controlled countermeasures is going to be a bit more limited. It does offer a stronger damage buff than magnified firepower, but again, only against controlled targets. So if you're looking for something simple, then magnified firepower is going to be the way to go. And for boosting survivability, especially if you're using energy weapons like beams or cannons, I'd recommend you take a look at Energy Refrequencer from Tier 2 of the Iconian Reputation. This can often net you up around 1,000 whole healing per second with enough outgoing shots. The only downside is that it does have a really annoying green swirl visual effect that you'll see going around your ship. And to recap the Space Reputation trait recommendations: advanced targeting systems for the critical severity, precision for the crit chance, Tyler's Duality for the crit chance. Those three are pretty much a staple on every endgame build, but for the last two traits, my go-to recommendation for someone just looking to keep it simple would be magnified firepower and then energy refrequencer. Those are just going to be beneficial to you going in playing random content, but you do have some flexibility there. Those last two traits, if you want to go in, play around with some of the other reputation traits, you could certainly go ahead and do that and still be perfectly effective. These are just generalist recommendations. There's other traits in this list that I did not mention that are perfectly capable as well. You may find that there's something better suited for the specific way that you play, and that's fine. If I didn't mention something here, it's not because it's bad, it's because I'm looking to keep this short and give the best recommendations to the player base at large. And moving on to the active space reputation slots, these are traits that are active abilities that will be added to your tray. They have a 5-minute cooldown, so you do not want to spam bar them. You want to use these when you actually need them in combat. Now, as you can see, there's only 7 options here and only 5 slots, so you can customize this a bit to your liking. But my recommendation would be Anti-Time Entanglement Singularity from the Temporal Reputation. This is a good bit of exotic damage, and it is going to slow down your foes and hold them potentially while they're in it. Then there is the Biomolecular Shield Gen from the 8472 or Undine Reputation. This is going to create a static shield bubble that is going to heal you and any allies within it within a 2.5 kilometer radius, so a good bit of shield healing there. And then we have Deploy Sensor Interference Platform from the Iconian Reputation. This is going to draw a threat away from you and help you stay alive. Then there is Quantum Singularity Manipulation, or QSM, from the Romulan Rep. This is going to give you a huge set of science stat buffs and also briefly cloak your ship for a couple seconds. So this is really nice to use prior to you hitting any big control or exotic abilities. That plus 125 is giving you 125 control, 125 EPG. Like, that's a huge set of stat buffs, and if you use this right before those big abilities, you're going to get a lot more from them. And then the last one I would slot is Refracting Tetrion Cascade. This is from the Nukara or Tholian Reputation, and what this does is it's going to chain Tetrion damage to a bunch of enemies that are grouped up together. So if you have enemies in like a Gravwell, using this and Anti-Time together can net a good amount of damage on them. So again, my recommendation here is Anti-Time, Biomolecular Shield Gen, Deploy Sensor Interference Platform, QSM, and Refracting Tetrion Cascade. Tethered, Non-Baryonic, and Force Challenge are both fine. It's just that they are a bit more niche. Force Challenge is pulling a foe right to in front of you, and that's just one foe every 5 minutes. And Tethered, Non-Baryonic, that can pull a couple of enemies together and chain them behind you for a couple seconds, but if you don't know what you're doing with it, you can just make a mess of the enemies and scatter them all over the place. So that is an ability that can be useful, but you need to understand how to use it. So for just general gameplay, the other 5 there, that's my recommendation. And moving over to the ground traits, a huge thanks to Valerie, Mara, and the kind folks in RNG for giving me some pointers on the current ground meta. Now, the fun thing with ground is that you can ask each of the top ground players what traits they think are best, and each of them is going to have their own spin on what they prefer. Some of it boils down to some preferring to still use weapons as their primary damage source rather than kit modules. Kit modules have been the meta for ground for a few years now, and then there's also different preferences based on how folks are used to running. So up on screen is a couple examples of some viable ground rep trait combos you can try out, and there's a couple that are common throughout this, and there is some alternatives not mentioned here that are perfectly viable as well, but these are the ones that popped up the most from everyone I was talking to. And first up here is Deadly Aim from Tier 1 of the Dyson Reputation. Just like the Space one, this is good for the crit severity, which is going to be beneficial to any build looking to do more damage. Then we have Magnified Armaments from Tier 3 of the Gamma Reputation. This is giving an all damage buff, which is making it great for either weapon or kit module loadouts. And then at all but the highest levels, Lethality from Tier 1 of the Romulan Reputation also makes an appearance for the 5% crit chance. At the very highest levels, there's so many buffs going into those builds that they've started to drop off some of the crit chance they have. So that's what you see over at the right where you don't have that crit chance straight. And then another one that was very commonly brought up was Miniaturized Chronocapacitor from Tier 1 of the Temporal Reputation. This is for the cooldown reduction it provides for kit modules. Even on a weapons-based loadout, you're still going to be hitting kit modules that are buffing up your weapons, so having those up a bit faster is going to be better. And for the last slot, there's a lot of variants here. I heard a lot of different answers. Mental Acuity from Tier 1 of 8472 or the Undine rep got a few mentions, and that does work well if you have a static playstyle where you're not moving much. On PC, if you just hit X on ground, you'll enter the aim stance, and that damage buff does also buff up kit modules, not just weapons. So if your playstyle is you're just sitting in one spot for a long time, that is a good trait to look at. Another one that popped up was Personal Amplifier from Tier 1 of the Iconian rep. That is a good Cat 2 damage buff for kit modules. It's not as much as Mental Acuity, but it's up all the time. So if you're a bit more mobile, you're moving around a ton, then that might be better for you. And there's quite a few other traits that popped up that people like to run. Some people like to run the Omega ones, like Omega Graviton Pulse module when they're doing board content, Omega Weapon Proficiency on weapons builds. Some people like the Emergency Personal Cloaking device. There's a lot of variants out there, and really, outside of the crit chance, severity, and magnified armaments, outside of those three traits, if you want to play around with these last two slots, you've got a ton of options. So don't feel locked into just the traits I am talking about here. If you want to play around with some of those slots, there is plenty of opportunity for you to do so. And for the active ground reputation slots, I like to run Defiance. That's a good damage buff and some survivability via the resistance you get when you're at a very low HP. You hit that, that's going to help keep you alive and help you do more damage. Medical Nanite Cloud, that's a good AoE heal that can also potentially res your teammates. One Little Ship, this is a runabout that'll spawn in and help you out in combat. That's pretty good. Piezoelectric Perimeter, that's going to do some damage for you, so that's good. And for the last slot, Visual Dampening Field, I know some people like this. There's also some people that like Concussive. Generally, I go for the Visual Dampening Field, but I do find that this thing does tank my FPS quite a bit whenever it's active, so just be aware of that. And if multiple people activate it at the same time, it's going to make some graphics cards very unhappy. And that wraps up this set of trait recommendations. Thanks again to Valerie, Mara, and the team at RNG for helping me out on the ground side. Thanks again also to the STO Discord for sponsoring today's video. And as always, thank you to all channel members and viewers for the continued support. See you guys around.